Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I recently saw a reel that I could not get out of my head. This video and their others are like it are by Gamer Crafting, run by Angie and Sarah. They are indie dyers located in the UK and also have a YouTube channel, and I believe sometimes they stream gaming and crafting. But what drew me in here was it looks like they're applying dry powder to yarn and then pouring it on hot liquid on top of it and letting the colors spread out that way, and I adore it. I adore it and want to try that myself. Before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Jules. Jules, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. And I really hope you'll love the way that this yarn will turn out because I think it's going to be awesome. I honestly don't remember if I came across Gamer Crafting's reels organically or if one of you sent it to me. So if you did send it to me, thank you. And I'm super excited to give this a shot. Today we are going to dye 300 grams of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn with 3 different bluish hues of Dharma acid dyes. I've picked a sort of standard bright primary blue color, bright aqua, which leans a little bit more green and is much brighter, and then a deeper blue. And I went for indigo just because it's one that I don't use quite as much. Now, I know from my video where I crudely swatched all my blue acid dyes that these 3 colors should look pretty distinct from one another, while giving us a beautiful blue and multiple different levels and hues kind of palette overall. This is my full-size 4-inch deep catering steam pan. And the pan is slightly damp because I just dyed some other yarn, but I am not pre-soaking the yarn at all. Stroll does absorb water pretty easily, so I think that it is a good base to do for this project. Another base I considered, and we'll see how things work, was Knit Pick Swish DK, which soaks up water even easier than Stroll. I am adding some removable nylon zip ties to my yarn. I like to do this as an easy way to help flip and separate the skeins without creating any kind of tangles. And it feels very odd to me to be laying out this fluffy yarn in the pan while it is dry. I'm so used to doing this wet. I'm about to go put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves since we will be dyeing with dry dye powder. But I thought that it was also worth taking this opportunity to remind you that while it is okay to be inspired by things you see on social media and things like that, you always want to put your own spin on any colorways that you are creating. So today I'm taking inspiration from a technique that I saw, but I am using my own colors and trying to create my own colorway from it. The one exception to this is that as a teacher, I invite you to copy my results. I include recipes and details for all the stuff I dye down in the video descriptions. I also include links and affiliate links to the different tools and equipment that I use in my videos to try to make it as easy as possible for you to achieve similar results to me. And so while I invite you to play around with the same techniques and colors and colorways that I'm creating, I'm probably the exception versus the rule. So unless you've been explicitly invited to do your own version of a colorway someone else is offering for sale, I wouldn't do that. But in my opinion, it is okay to see a technique and want to try that out for yourself. But again, you always want to put your own spin and perspective onto things. But now let's go dye some yarn. I do have one wet skein of Stroll on hand that I dunked into some water that was just tap water with white vinegar in it, so that way we can use this as a yarn mop as we're dyeing. And I'm going to take my gloved hands that may have some residual dye on them, wipe them onto this yarn so we leave no dye behind. And this is probably going to be just out of frame. Okay, I've changed around the way I'm orienting myself a few times here. Let's start with some sapphire blue. And I'm going to take this powder. Let's see, we're gonna just sort of heavily sprinkle it on. I am making sure that as I'm adding the powder on, I am sort of breaking up any clumps that might be here. I pause for a long hot second to decide where I may want some more of this color or not. And now you see the dye on my gloved fingertips. That is what I'm going to take and wipe onto this yarn mop, just so that way we can make something out of that color. And in between each color, I will be wiping my gloved hands on a paper towel to remove that moisture, so I'm not introducing any moisture into these jars. Okay, now I've got some bright aqua, which is a very, very pretty color. I believe it might have a little bit of some fluorescent lemon to it, which I think is very, very cool. Let's add some more here. I think we'll go back into the sapphire again in a moment. I suppose we can leave some white, but I'm enjoying applying this dye just all over. I mean, we can always add more dye later on. We're not limited to what we add now. So that's what I just need to remind myself. And I'm doing a little bit less of the indigo. I don't know how much of this will spread. We may need to, well, we will probably need to flip and add color to the other side. I suppose it depends on how much yarn or how much water we add. And just to quickly show, the indigo is a lot deeper than the sapphire, although if it's diluted it might look a little bit more similar, but then the bright aqua absolutely looks very different from the others. And so we only did a tiny bit of indigo. I am going to add a little bit more sapphire blue just because, I don't know, I want there to be nice coverage to start with. But, oh, I'm so excited. I don't know what's going to, well, I know what's going to happen, but I don't know how it's going to go. Okay, and now I have a liter of tap water, hot tap water, with 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And I am just going to start pouring it on. Oh, that looks so fun. The yarn sunk down so much. Okay, here's a 2nd liter of water with another tablespoon of white vinegar. And I'm pouring that on too. Oh, funny. Oh, funny. I'm trying to see if I can see the indigo. Maybe not as much, but this is really, really pretty. Okay, now I'm coming in with 8 cups of hot tap water, no vinegar this time. And now we should really, really start to have enough coverage here for the yarn. And I'm going to get a spoon. Well, I was going to go get a spoon, but honestly, I could just use my hands because it's not that hot. I'm starting in our bright aqua areas to sort of give that kind of what it wants. Yeah, the difference between the sapphire blue and the indigo I think is more apparent if I use similar amounts of dye, but since I used a lot less indigo dye, I think that that could be a difference that we're seeing. I am so curious to know how deep these colors have penetrated the yarn when we've done this way. Because now, I mean, maybe more than if I just added the colors with a spoon. I am very, very intrigued. Let me get, speaking of a spoon, let's see what's going on. All right, we've got a fair amount of color here in each of the sections. I am gonna go ahead and just let things sit for, I think, about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and check in. The reason why I'm gonna let it sit is that we do have warm water here, and I do see that colors do start to strike at least a little bit, even at room temperature, and I'm curious just to see how much of any of these colors will feel left, and yeah, then we'll flip the yarn. The pan is definitely warm. I still see a little bit of some bright aqua remaining. But our sapphire and our indigo have pretty much cleared. We will be heating this properly at the end because I don't want just this hot tap water. I don't think that's enough heat. But I do feel okay flipping it. And the reason why I didn't bother to heat it before this is that I wanted to stay on the counter. And so coverage-wise, I think we've got pretty good coverage, and maybe a little bit more than if I started with the dye in water already. I mean, either way, it was super, super fun to apply things this way. There is no question about that. But I do want to add more color. So I'm going to put my respirator mask, safety glasses, and I'm wearing my gloves back on, and we'll add some dye. I added the 3 colors in approximately the same order I had done the first time. Wiping my hands on the yarn mop and drying them off before working the color through a little bit with my tongs. I opted for the tongs at first instead of my fingers because, well, I kind of wanted to add more color to the yarn mop, and so that just made sense. But I did work through each color pretty close to after I added it, so that way I could let it spread a little bit more. If I waited to try to move the colors around until I apply dye over the entire pan, then the colors may not spread quite as far. I totally went in a little bit heavier with my indigo this time, and I am just sort of working it through a little more. I do not mind if we end up with some pastel sections. I just want a reasonable amount of coverage, and I'm trying to not spread the colors into the bright aqua too much. I keep wanting to call it sea spray, even though that I know that's not the color that it is. But let's see how we are doing. There's a tiny bit there. There's gonna be a lot more. I went a lot bigger. I went a lot bigger this time. So yeah, I think that what I'm gonna do now is take this over to the stove so we can start heating it. All right, I'm gonna turn on the heat. We have probably about 16 cups of water in here total, which is a fair amount of liquid, and so I'm not worried about things going dry. The only thing I can see myself wanting to do is adding a little bit more bright aqua once these other colors have set a bit, but we'll see how much of it is still there versus how much of it has disappeared, because again, I went pretty big this time. I have the heat on high. I'm across 2 gas burners for a moment while things start heating up, but then I will reduce the heat to low. I don't want things to get to too much of a boil. And we'll check back in 10 to 15 minutes or so. Would I do this again? Totally. I would totally do this again. And you could convince me to do this sometime where I add the dye, add the liquid, and then I do not add more color to the other side. Maybe we move things around a little bit, but then we'll leave it as it is. However, when you start any kind of technique, you are only done when you decide the colorway is done. And I think that the yarn could have been really beautiful without adding more color to start with. But I think that if I were to do this and not add more color, I would probably start off pouring on water with no acid, so colors wouldn't start striking very much yet. My tap water is slightly acidic, but I would add the water to let things sort of spread out a bit, and then in maybe like one of the last pours, add some acid in there as well. And the other thing I might do is only do it with, say, 200 grams of yarn. Using a lot less yarn means that there's more surface area exposed at the top. And so, yeah, I mean, clearly Editing Rebecca is taking notes for me to do this as another video sometime soon. Truthfully, it's only been 7 to 8 minutes, but I did check it, and the good news is that these colors are striking really, really well. I'm not seeing any color on the spoon. So, woohoo! Now I'm curious. Wow, I may be really, really impressed. We have a few light patches, but not many, and I'm not bothered by it. How many times have you seen me go for a variegated yarn and keep adding more and more color? Ooh, look at that breaking. We got some green in that one. That's pretty. But I'll add more and more color as we keep going, and I'm feeling satisfied. So this is having me extra excited about this technique. And I'd like to try it again with doing the colors in more random placement like I enjoy doing. But I think that we got such good coverage on that first layer, and things weren't so hot that the colors were striking immediately. So when I added more color, I still had time to spread them out a bit. Ooh. And I like the light patches. I'm satisfied. I am so happy. I do think I want to add just a tiny bit more acid because I think we maybe only had like equivalent of 2 tablespoons in about 16 cups of water. I don't remember, but I just added a little bit more, and I am going to go ahead and heat this because at this point it's been over 10 minutes. I'm going to heat this for another 20 minutes. Then I'll turn off the heat, let it cool completely so we can wash the yarn. But Jules, I really hope you're going to like it. And meanwhile, I will go steam set this yarn mop for 30 minutes. Let's wash all of our yarn together, including the yarn mop. And we are going to cross fingers, but given that the dye bath was clear, I'm not expecting any bleeding. But honestly, how often am I expecting bleeding? Maybe there's a hair, but I wouldn't even really consider that anything. Since we were dyeing with dry powders, there's always a chance that there could be a little bit of color that shows up. That doesn't mean that there's bad bleeding. It just could be some undissolved dye. I just added some clear dish soap. And let's see. Oh, that looks so good. So good. But I'm very, very excited where this color is so far. And the yarn mop, I mean, it has all the same colors in it. The yarn mop looks so good with the other colors. But anyway, I am going to try really hard to not tangle anything. I'm going to finish rinsing out the soap, put all the yarn through my spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. And sometimes people ask, when I hang it to dry, I literally just have a drying rack that I hang the yarn onto to air dry further. I don't know if it had to do with the dry powder followed by pouring hot liquid on it kind of technique, but whatever we did today, we got really great soft coverage onto our yarn, and I love it. And I feel like I need to say to editing Rebecca, I know you always keep notes on the conditions and when I add acid and things like that, but I especially hope you did so today, because sometimes I think I start with so much acid in my yarn at first that as I add the dye, even if it's cold, things strike faster than I want. And then sometimes I get frustrated that I have to keep adding more dye over and over and over again, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. But in general, whether or not it's what I did today, I need to try playing around with using less acid when I'm hand painting yarns. That way I can get those colors to move through more. And this is a technique I have done. I don't know, forget that I should do that. I don't think it's really showing up on camera, but we do have some breaking from the, was it bright aqua that we used? There's some hints of bright green, and supposedly this color is fluorescent, or a little bit fluorescent, which means that it probably has a little bit of fluorescent lemon in it to bring it to this more aqua color versus a more bright cyan. The indigo is subtle, but you can see it in here. The blue, it almost has like a hint of some green to it, or maybe a little bit more pink than this brighter blue that we have. It's subtle, but I like those shifts. You can feel a little bit more of all of the blue hues here in our yarn mop where we had them separate. And I think it's always important to remember that even if on powder, our colors are different hues. So we have 3 different blue colors we were using here today. The intensity and the amount of those colors that you add is important. Because if we have indigo at a lighter depth of shade, because I think at first I layered it on not super heavy, then it became a lot closer to that other blue we were using. Even though more concentrated, one is a bright blue and one is more in the navy kind of category. And so that's just worth keeping in mind. Jules, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope that you enjoyed the whole video and that you're gonna love your very, very blue yarn. If any of you would like to learn more about how you can become a lab partner like Jules, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. Of course, my shop is also filled with tons of hand-dyed yarn featured in past and sometimes upcoming videos. And so it's a great way to help support the content here and get some pretty yarn at the same time. So anyway, Jules, thank you again for being my lab partner. I don't think it's entirely fair to call this colorway monochromatic. We did use a lot of different blues, but does a monochromatic kind of thing, I mean, I guess you can do monochromatic and have different depths and intensities of a single color, right? I'm not sure, but whatever it is, I like playing with one color on itself. And I do something like this and I'm like, ooh, I want to do a pink and a purple and a green and an orange and a brown version of this kind of colorway. And so that just, I don't know, makes me smile a little bit. Please make sure you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. And let me know down in the comments below if there are any other kinds of techniques or methods of application of dye that you think I should try. I do keep a running list of viewer suggestions, and so it is, I guess, a fun way to help influence the content that we're gonna see. And I know that I'm gonna wanna try this again. I think it would also be fun to start with using a spray bottle on top of the dry powder and spraying that and then pouring more liquid on top. Ooh, I could think of a lot of different variations that would be very, very fun. Or honestly, we could start off with liquid dyes and start pouring that onto the dry yarn. I don't think I've done hand painting kind of techniques where the yarn has been dry without submerging it first. Interesting. Editing Rebecca is writing this all down. This is one of the great things about filming all of my projects and experiments as I try things for the first time. As I sit and think about like, ooh, I should try this, I should try that. I know future me is writing it all down into my list of ideas that I pull from when I go and make new videos. But anyway, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.